We're going deep on the idea of a United States of Africa. I've been looking through everything you sent over. Videos, articles, even a website that looks like it's straight out of the 90s. It's clear this idea has really captured your attention. And honestly, mine too. It's bold, it's ambitious, and it's honestly a little mind-boggling. So to help us really understand this, I've got an expert here to break it all down. So what are we really talking about here? What's the core idea behind the United States of Africa?
Well, it's fascinating, this idea of a unified Africa. It's been around for decades, but it seems like there's a resurgence of interest, particularly from certain groups advocating for a pretty fundamental change, like in how we even perceive and interact with the continent.
So it's not just some theoretical idea,
Yeah.
like gathering dust somewhere.
Definitely not. Your sources highlight some really dedicated people actively working to make this vision a reality. Take, for example, R.J. Mahdi. He's the driving force behind the R.J. Mahdi YouTube channel. His passion is contagious, and he's really zeroed in on this idea of encouraging the African diaspora to come back, to return, specifically to Senegal. He sees it as a sort of symbolic homecoming point.
Yeah, and he's not just talking the talk, right? He's actually setting things up, initiatives and such.
Exactly. He's got the Africans for Africans movement and then the Made in Africa project. These are creating real, tangible economic opportunities in Senegal. It's not just about calling for people to come back. He's laying the groundwork.
It's really impressive.
Yeah.
And then we've got Mark K. Wood. He's been advocating for a United States of Africa since way back in the 90s. And get this, he was inspired by a conversation with Muhammad Ali. He's the one behind USAfrica, and that website, UnitedStatesAfrica.com. It's wonderfully old school.
Oh, it really is. It's really fascinating to see how this idea has stuck around and evolved. Wood's approach is interesting because he's focused on building this grassroots coalition, connecting with people on a very personal level, trying to cultivate support for such a huge goal.
And that's a pretty different approach from the Big Island Reporter channel. I mean, they have this incredibly bold timeline, a United States of Africa by 2026. They're talking about dissolving colonial borders, a single currency, even harnessing solar power from the Sahara Desert. And it's a pretty radical idea.
It is. While that timeline might be a bit optimistic, it really does speak to the urgency, the passion fueling this movement. The Big Island Reporter channel seems to favor a more top-down approach, really emphasizing political and structural changes. That's in contrast to, Mahdi and Wood, who prioritize grassroots action and economic empowerment.
And then there's the United States of Africa Project YouTube channel. They seem more focused on advocating for a unified Africa, but free from foreign exploitation. There's definitely this recurring theme, right? This push for self-determination, a desire for Africa to chart its own course.
Without a doubt, escaping that legacy of colonialism, resisting ongoing colonial influence, those are major driving forces behind this movement. Many proponents believe a unified Africa could leverage its resources and talent and become this global powerhouse, creating prosperity for its people and really reclaiming its place on the world stage.
So there's this deep desire for autonomy, for agency, for a future where Africa defines itself, not by its past, not by outside forces. But what about the practical side of things? How would a United States of Africa actually function?
That's where things get even more interesting. Your sources lay out all sorts of structures and systems, like a single currency, a unified military, shared education systems, massive infrastructure projects. We're talking about re-envisioning an entire continent.
It's a truly colossal undertaking. And it begs the question, where do you even begin? USA4USAfrica.pdf brings up the European Union, suggesting it as a possible model.
That EU analogy is interesting because it shows that uniting different nations is at least theoretically possible, but it also highlights potential problems, things like bureaucracy, economic gaps, and the complexities of giving up some national sovereignty.
And of course, Africa's situation is unique. The legacy of colonialism, ongoing conflicts, and the influence of outside powers add layers of complexity that Europe didn't really have during its integration.
Exactly, and that's what makes that image of Asmara, Eritrea, as this bustling federal capital of the United States of Africa, as depicted in USA4USAfrica.pdf, so thought-provoking. It's a vision, a possibility. But it also raises questions about how to bridge the gap between that image and the reality of African politics today.
I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here. We've got these passionate visionaries, bold ideas, a lot of historical baggage, and some pretty complex geopolitical realities to think about. Where do we go from here?
That's the exciting part of a deep dive like this. We're just starting to unravel this multifaceted issue. It's about recognizing the potential and the challenges, the grand visions, and the real-world complexities.
Okay, let's dive deeper then. Let's see what these sources have to say about how to tackle the hurdles facing this big idea.
So let's tackle those hurdles head on, shall we? A lot of your sources seem to converge on this concept of self-reliance, like it's key to solving some of these
Oh
problems.
yeah, you're right. There was a part in USA4 USAfrica.pdf that really struck me. The one about Africa not just feeding itself, but becoming like a major food exporter.
It's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially given the history of exploitation, all that resource extraction. This is about taking back control, not just of the resources, but of the whole narrative.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, we have the land, the people, the smarts. Let's use that to build our own success, not let others profit from it.
Exactly. And it's not just agriculture either. Business in Focus makes a really interesting point about technology and innovation. They argue that it plays a crucial role in unifying the continent.
Yeah, I was really intrigued by their take on mobile banking, e-commerce, all that, how it's breaking down barriers, fostering connections in ways we couldn't have imagined just a few years ago.
It's like the digital revolution is creating a shortcut.
Yeah.
It bypasses some of those traditional development roadblocks, allowing for more direct engagement, more empowerment.
So technology could be this unifying force. It's interesting to think about how those advancements could really reshape a United States of Africa. But what about existing institutions like the African Union? What happens to them? Would the idea be to do away with them or build on what's already there?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it sparks a lot of debate. Some folks see the AAU as too bogged down in bureaucracy, too tied to individual nation states, and ultimately just not effective enough to bring about the changes they want to see.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's got to be tough to get all those leaders on the same page.
It is, but others argue that the AU provides a solid foundation. They point to things like progress on free trade agreements, the African Continental Free Trade Area, as proof that working together on a continental level can work.
That free trade area is huge. It could really open up a whole new level of economic activity across Africa.
Absolutely. It suggests that incremental progress is possible. The question is it enough? Or do we need something more drastic, more fundamental, to truly unlock Africa's potential?
Man, that's a tough one. I don't think there's an easy answer there. But at least these sources aren't afraid to ask those hard questions.
They aren't. And another big issue we need to address is the potential for, well, division, internal power struggles. Even if you could figure out the logistics, the politics of unifying Africa, how do you prevent the same old patterns of corruption, of authoritarianism from taking hold?
A valid concern. I mean, history's full of examples of revolutions with good intentions. That ended up leading to new forms of oppression.
Exactly. And that's why all this talk about grassroots movements, about people power, is so important. A truly unified and empowered Africa can't just be dictated by those at the top. It has to be built from the ground up, with people from all over the continent participating.
It goes back to those personal stories we were discussing. Individuals taking charge, pushing for change, building the future they want to see. It's really inspiring.
It is. They're showing that change doesn't have to wait for governments or institutions. It can start with individuals, with communities who are willing to challenge things.
It can feel overwhelming, thinking about the scale of the challenges. But those stories are a good reminder that even small actions can make a difference.
Yeah, that's right. They remind us that hope isn't just a feeling, it's a call to action. It's about believing that a better future is possible, even when things seem really tough.
Speaking of tough things, I was struck by that part in the United States of Africa project video, where they talk about the need to address xenophobia and tensions between African communities.
That's a sobering reminder. Achieving unity isn't just about overcoming external challenges. It's also about confronting internal divisions, fostering a sense of shared identity, of solidarity among diverse groups.
The incident they mentioned, where South Africans attacked immigrants from other African countries, that really highlights the fact that prejudice, mistrust, it can exist even within a movement that advocates for Pan-African unity.
Absolutely, and it emphasizes how important education, dialogue, and cultural exchange are. In building a truly unified Africa, it can't just be about politics and economics, it has to be about fostering genuine understanding, respect between people from different backgrounds, different experiences.
It's about embracing our shared humanity, celebrating our differences, working together to build a future where those differences are strengths, not things that divide us.
And that brings us to another layer of complexity. How do you balance this desire for unity with the incredible diversity of cultures, languages, and political systems? I mean, there are so many across the continent.
It's a real balancing act, right? You want to create that sense of shared identity and purpose without erasing the unique identities of individual nations and communities.
It's about finding that sweet spot where unity and diversity can coexist, maybe even reinforce each other. A unified Africa wouldn't have to mean uniformity. It could mean creating a space where different voices and perspectives are heard, valued.
And that's where I think the power of those personal stories comes in. They show us that connection, empathy, they can transcend borders and differences.
They do, and they give us a glimpse of what a truly unified Africa could be. A continent where people from all different backgrounds and experiences can come together, share their stories, learn from each other, build a future based on respect and understanding.
It's a vision worth working towards, right? A continent that embraces its diversity, harnesses its potential, stands tall on the world stage, not as a bunch of fragmented states, but as a united force.
It's a vision that demands courage, compassion, and a willingness to challenge